Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai, welcome to the Early Childhood Seminar Series. We'll begin our time together with karakia. Me enoi tātou. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa namu te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai. Tātou ia tātou katoa. Haumi e, hui e, hae ki e. Thank you for joining us for today's presentation by Professor Alex Gunn from the University of Otago College of Education. Alex is a long-time friend and supporter of the Early Childhood Seminar Series, and we're delighted to have her with us to share her work around revisiting and restoring connections between Te Whāriki and assessment practices in early childhood education, a topic I know which is of great interest to our early childhood community. If any questions arise for you during the presentation that you would like to ask Professor Gunn, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and she'll respond to them at the end of her presentation. You can also use the chat function throughout the presentation to connect with each other and the panelists. After the seminar, a recording will be available on our Early Childhood Seminar Series YouTube channel. I will now pass over to Professor Helen Hedges to welcome and introduce Professor Gunn. Kia ora, Helen.
Tēnā koe, Justine, me kia ora koutou. He pai kia au te whakamohio ato I tō tātou kai kōrero I tēnei rā. It's my pleasure to introduce and welcome our speaker today, Ahoraki Alex Gunn. I begin with a whakatoki. He aha te kai a te rangatira. He kōrero, he kōrero, he kōrero. What is the food of a leader? It is talk and dialogue. So not only does this whakatoki describe that we meet collectively for kōrero today, it also encapsulates the contributions of our speaker. Alex began her career as a teacher and came to teacher education and research from this important background. Without a doubt, Alex is unparalleled in Aotearoa and her ongoing and significant contributions to every policy group in Aotearoa, such as the Ministry of Education, the Education Review Office, the Teaching Council, or whatever they're called now, and so on. Alex is the only early childhood member of the Ministry's Curriculum Advisory Group. Currently, she has a keen interest and watching brief on the implementation of the actions of the Early Learning Action Plan, including those about assessment and teachers' practices that are the topic of her presentation today. Hence, she has a broad research program ranging from teacher education to curriculum and assessment. Within these, key threads that connect her program are her focus on diversity and inclusion and advocacy for the experiences of Kaiako and Tamariki. So just a reminder, please, to use the Q&A to pose questions that you'd like me to put to Alex after her presentation. Koto wā, over to you, Alex.
Tēnā koe, Helen. Tēnā koe, Justine. Thank you for getting us started this afternoon. So, mihi atu kia koutou, tēnā koutou e hōma. Malo lelei, talofa lava, taloha ni, kia orana, whakalofa lahi atu, namaste, nisa bula, warm Pacific greetings. Ko aoraki te maunga I ahuri nei taku ngākau. Ko whanganui a tāra tōku tino moana. No ko te rani o ku tipuna, e tai mai tōku mātua ki Aotearoa e te waikanui o te rarautau. Ko Gunn tōku iwi ko te rani. No porero ahau, kei koputai taku kāinga anaine, ko Alex Gunn tōku ingoa. It's lovely to be here and supporting the Auckland Seminar Series. So thank you for the invitation, and I hope that over the next 30-35 minutes or so, I'll give you some ideas and provocations as we think collectively about our assessment work in ECE again. So today, I'd like to take some time to revisit and restore or re-story connections between Te Whāriki, and assessment practices in early childhood education. By foregrounding key understandings about purposes of assessment from the point of view of the learner, I draw from Te Whāriki and associated documents to consider again the whys and wherefores of a teacher's work and assessment in teaching. Today, I'm hoping to support Kaiako to restore or re-story their relationships with assessment practices, both documented and undocumented assessment. And I hope that you will recognise it as an integral aspect of your daily work, rather than as how I mainly hear about it, as a post-hoc non-contact time burden or out-of-work time add-on to your daily practice. Key concepts that I'd like to touch on today include the power of good assessment, why formative, why narrative. What about undocumented assessment? We don't talk about this very much. Why are we still writing about learning dispositions? This is a genuine question that I've had posed at me recently. What about working theories? As I said, I would like to try and reconnect with some conceptual framings of assessment in light of Te Whāriki, so that Kaiako might evaluate their current practices and hopefully affect positive change. So what's the problem that I'm trying to talk about? What's the problem I'm addressing in this talk? For me, it's the persistent framing of assessment work, that is documented assessment actually, as too hard, too time-consuming, too disconnected from the actual child, and overall too burdensome that I want to respond to. You know, we hear from publications, like even our own Education Gazette, from articles on websites and a few published papers, that learning stories are too cumbersome. They're too infrequently produced to be of any use. They're too difficult for parents to comprehend. They're focused on too fuzzy a concept, learning dispositions, and so on. And the Education Review Office has problematised assessment work for many years, calling it too disconnected from planning. They've criticised it for its variability in practice, being not focused enough, and so on and so forth. And then structural components of early childhood practice have intersected with these ideas, and they've produced teachers' assessment work again as problematic in practice, as managers and leaders demand a certain number of documented assessments about a certain range of curriculum content in a certain format with the right number of images balanced with text in certain timeframes, which have to be accounted for in terms of teachers' release time, or more likely their unpaid work, coupled with layers of new work practices such as data generation, photos and videos, data management, uploading, downloading, drafting, checking, redrafting, signing off on, and so on and so forth. Basically, to me, the whole enterprise seems to have been sold down the pathway of officious managerialism and public accountability, rather than where it started out. Documented assessment as a window into embedded formative assessment practices that focus our attention on children learning to learn in communities and contexts of significance to them. So today's a bit of an invitation to get a grip, and I'm seeking to restore or re-story our connections with assessment work in the context of Te Whāriki, and hopefully in doing so, give license to Kaiako to do the same. Today, I'm going to draw a little bit from my inaugural professorial lecture and talk about the power of assessment and the power of narrative assessment as learning stories. And I want to draw attention to the work that the story is doing in terms of outcomes for children and thereafter everyone else. I want Kaiako to recognise the power of the pen, the potential that you wield, and why that matters in the context of our curriculum framework. And really, as I'm talking, I'm commenting on important teachers' work and on how teachers' assessment practices have to stitch the whole teaching and learning enterprise together in a way that addresses a whole range of purposes, uppermost of all in my mind, the authoring of the child as a capable and competent learner who is interested, who is involved, who is grappling with, communicating about, and contributing to the world. So here I have 4 iterations of our early childhood curriculum framework, Te Whāriki, and I'm anticipating a 5th after the gazetting of the full framework, inclusive of the Te Ao Māori interpretations of goals and learning outcomes, perhaps sometime later this year. The ideas I'm restoring connections to today have featured really consistently across the lifespan of this curriculum framework, which articulates around the notion of empowerment of the child, holistically and in partnership with them and their whānau, through responsive and reciprocal relationships with people, places, and things. We all know the aspiration statement of our curriculum framework, that children are capable and competent learners, healthy in mind, body, and spirit, secure in their sense of belonging, and in the knowledge they make a valued contribution to society. Well, one of our main shared objectives here as teachers, and in terms of learning in the context of this curriculum framework, is to produce children as strong learners, whose mana and understandings of themselves as learners serve them as they learn and do stuff in the world. As Dame Tilly Reddy described all those years ago when Te Whāriki in this form, as our curriculum framework, was in its infancy, the principal outcome of Te Whāriki is that the child is nurtured in the knowledge that they are loved and respected, that their physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional strength will build influence and control, that having mana is the enabling and empowering tool to controlling their own destiny. Now, I really do remember when I heard these words uttered at the Early Childhood Convention in Tamaki Makaurau in 1995. Is that what I signed up for? And then immediately thinking, oh, hey, this is really what I signed up for. And I hope this is what you signed up for too when you decided to teach in early childhood education. And so here you've got a bit of a context for why I'm traversing some old-ish ground today. I think many of us have lost contact with Te Whāriki's call for us to strengthen with children and whānau, children's identities as learners, because we've become distracted by a whole host of other things. Or perhaps some of us never really connected with these ideas in the first place, or they never put those other things in their place. And so I want to cut through all those other distractions and prioritize children's interest as learners first, and see if this can restore our connections to those long-standing aims. So I have a few imaginings to talk about today. Imagine over time weaving with children a kete peko of knowledge, understandings, and grounded examples of them as strong learners in their early childhood settings, of children as people who can, in the right time and in the right place, be courageous and curious, trusting and playful, who persevere when things change, get tough, or become unexpected, who are confident to express their feelings and points of view, and who can take responsibility in that place with others, and champion equity, including in that kete how their teachers have factored into that. Well, this is an imagining that you shouldn't have to work on too hard, because it's something that you should already be doing through your documented and undocumented assessment practice every single day at work. You do this by meeting children each day on their terms and in relation to their emerging interests, ideas, and initiatives. You do it by providing feedback to children, encouragement, and by complexifying their thinking, by cooperating over curriculum. You do it by recognizing and celebrating children's ever-changing capacities in the place where you work with these people and these things. And what I'm describing here is teaching. Teaching is assessment, formative assessment work that sees you in concert with children, tweaking and changing and adapting curriculum in real time and in response to learning goals and next steps. This is very powerful assessment work that you're engaging with every day. Now, before I move on, I just want to acknowledge the children, the Kaiako, and the community of Central Kids Opotiki here, who, when I was putting this talk together, had some images and a little narrative online about some work that had happened at their kindergarten. They generously gave me permission to share this photo of children using new kitepeko, which were created with and for them by Auntie Trudy. And you can see this person here on the left with an almost overfilled kete, and the person beside them with a kete that's filling up nicely. It just spoke to this idea of arming children with knowledge and understanding of themselves. So, tēnā koutou katoa. So, your formative assessment work. When you do this, you challenge children. You support them to accomplish what they cannot yet accomplish alone. And over time, you'll support changes in concert with the child's changing capabilities, and development ensues. This is very powerful work, and I'd like to talk you through an example. Okay, I want to quote here from a report that I had written to whānau and Kaiako after I'd done some work with them in 2013 about how narrative assessment as learning stories have become cultural tools in early childhood practice in New Zealand that support children and families to construct personal memories and to contribute to children's identity development over time. So my thanks to Kaiako whānau and Pepe from University of Otago Childcare Association, the Infants and Toddler Centre, for this example. Now, in the accompanying text to this narrative assessment, and you haven't got the whole narrative here, you've got one piece of it. The teacher wrote, they had deliberately placed these two infants together to see what they thought of each other. The documentation shows the children gazing and touching each other. It shows them negotiating space. It shows them finding interesting new friends in the mirror. The story gives an account of these children as active meaning makers who are jointly engaged with each other and the environment in the context of a deliberately staged teaching activity. The assessment shows learning in community, but also special connections here with human and more than human others in the learning environment. And these things support the learning of individuals within that social space. A baby blanket, the floor, a mirror, the play of light and reflection. But there are other stories that this narrative is telling too, about the intentional decision-making of the Kaiako and why they acted on the program in a particular moment and for what reasons. First and foremost, with Ngā Pepe, they understood that these two would likely be very interested in each other, that they might take encouragement from each other to roll over, that they might take pleasure in gazing intently at themselves and each other and using the mirror. And then the Kaiako went on to document the experience, the relationship, the contact, so that these Pepe can later revisit this experience, so that other Kaiako in the centre can understand this burgeoning relationship, so that the families of these Pepe can appreciate the widening circle of relationships their tamariki are entering into in their absence. Fundamentally, this judgment that the Kaiako made to place these people in this place with these things supports these infants' emerging questions, interests, and interactions. And in this piece of documented assessment information, it changes how we understand these pepe as interactants, as capable, interested people, learning in, with, and from the world and each other. So why are Kaiako encouraged to do these things? To notice, recognise, and respond to and encourage children's courageousness and curiosities, their trust and playfulness, their perseverance, their confidence to express ideas and points of view, their ability to be responsible and to champion justice. Well, we think in the context of our curriculum framework that this is what a strong learner does. And if anyone, think about it, at any stage of their life wants to pursue an idea or some knowledge or develop a new capability, they have to be courageous enough and interested enough in the world to be curious about it, but then they actually have to act, to trust the place, the thing, the people, the situation enough to get involved with it and to get playful or creative with it, to stick with it when it gets hard or when it's challenging. Along the way, they usually share their experience with others. They let people know about it. And if it's something that others desire to know and do as well, then that person can share their expertise as they take responsibility in the social setting and enculturate others into the wonders of what they know and can do. In the empirical work into assessment and Te Whāriki, this process was explained like this. In any given experience or over time, when someone is pursuing some knowledge or capability, they make decisions about how or whether to take up this pursuit. In the early childhood setting, children have to decide whether there is anything interesting there. And for anybody starting an ECE, at the very beginning, mostly all of their interests lay elsewhere. And so they have to take time to become familiar with and interested in the opportunities afforded there. They have to decide if there is anything interesting, whether they're going to get involved with it, whether they're going to persist with the challenges that might come up, lots of noise, lots of people, lots of distractions. They decide whether or not and how to express their ideas and eventually take responsibility. And these decisions are fueled by dispositions. They're fueled by being courageous and curious. Courageous and curious enough to be interested, by being trusting and playful enough to act or get involved. You have to be disposed towards persistence if you're going to meet challenges, changes, and unexpected happenings head on. You have to be confident to express yourself and to responsibly act for yourself and others. Think back to those pepe that I just talked about. Was this them? I think it was. And why does this matter? Well, because Te Whāriki charged Kaiako, whose core professional expertise is supposed to be learning, Te Whāriki has charged teachers with helping children understand themselves as a learner, so that over time, children can know the strategies they might draw from, how they might take a risk, how they might fail well. Because without this, well, it's awfully difficult to learn. So I'm hoping that most of you will have seen a version of this figure across the years. This is my pretty poor attempt at the iceberg model of curriculum that was introduced to us way back in about 1998. So this is the iceberg representation of curriculum and how the particular learning dispositions that we have stitched into Te Whāriki map onto the curriculum framework to underscore this particular construct of a learner and learning that's encapsulated in the framework. So while we might observe those decisions in action, being interested, being involved, persisting with, confidently expressing a point of view, taking responsibility, those things only happen because they are fueled by huge reservoirs of experiences, sensibilities, and contexts in which children belong, where their well-being is of principal concern, where they can explore, experiment, communicate, and contribute. And if we were to talk about how someone was acting in these ways, the description that we would likely give would take on a story-like quality. We'd have a context, we'd have characters, important people and things, we'd have a problem of some kind likely, an expression of success and a resolution or consequence of the adventure just been told. Likely our account would have been very interesting. It would have been attention-grabbing. It probably would not have tried to bore us with too many details. But it would have given us just enough information to get a picture of the actors, human and more than human, the actions and the decisions, so that we could get a picture of this whole constellation in action and learn from it to shape subsequent experiences anew. And so also now we're reminded of why story and why these particular kinds of stories about children's emergent interests, working theories and learning dispositions serve as a basis for assessment practice that authors and authorizes children as powerful learners, including telling us what Kaiako are doing in support of this. And I know that by showing you an example of documented assessment, the two pepe just before, that I moved into the realm of talking about documented assessment. But I hope that my description of the other stories that were being told therein helps you to recognize the scope of the work that the documented assessment is referencing. The documented assessment isn't the be-all and end-all of the assessment work that you're doing, but it does have an important role in serving as a window into the embedded practices of formative assessment as teaching. We can't expect that it can capture everything, but it should report enough to show the people who weren't there what the significance of the documented learning is, what people and things mattered to it, what sense the Kaiako and perhaps even the child made of it, and what was planned for next. Now, it also has an important role in helping children understand themselves as learners so that they can, over time, know what strategies they might draw on, how they might take a risk, and as I said earlier, how to fail well. Because without being armed with this knowledge, it's awfully difficult to be a strong learner and to use your power in advance of your goals. So here's another imagining. Imagine sharing stories with children about their strengths and preferences as a learner, their changing capabilities, the way they set goals, the way they pursue opportunities. Well, again, you shouldn't really have to imagine this, because if you are cooperating with children in curriculum, if you are co-constructing challenges, if you are making meaning together, if you are reflecting on how you're doing in pursuit of particular goals and opportunities, you'll be providing feedback to children regularly about their learning processes and how, for instance, they could ask good questions or respond to suggestions or try different actions as they work with you and others in the world. And then following this up with documented assessment that feeds back to children about the same things provides you with plenty of opportunities to reinforce these messages about children as learners and to open the eyes of others to this as well. Now, I routinely say to student teachers when we're talking about documented assessment or narrative assessment as learning stories, imagine it's the end of the day, it's quiet, most of the children have left. You're sitting on the couch with a particular child, you're reading their learning story portfolio with them. What do you want them to learn from you and from their assessment information? It's a key question. What should the children learn? Most often, we get to the point of recognizing the power of these documents to teach children about how great they are at learning, how their learning power gets activated in the center with these people and these things. We talk about wanting children to understand the strategies that they use, how they can help themselves or others if they get stuck. This is the power of the teacher's writing, and how through their assessment practice they may author and authorize children as learners of a particular kind. Someone who's interested, involved, who can grapple with a problem, confidently express a point of view, a feeling, and take responsibility in the world. And so I want to turn now to the important work of narrative assessment as learning stories, and the important work they do in helping teachers deliver on their responsibility to recognise how children are capable and competent learners, contributing to and shaping the worlds of which they are part. And here, I'm going to refer to Lorraine Sand's recent master's research, which explores how learning stories have shaped understandings of children's learning identities over time. As a recent empirical work about the consequential validity of early childhood assessment, my description, not Lorraine's, this research serves as an important reminder of why learning stories are fit for purpose in assessment terms in the context of addressing the imperatives of Te Whāriki. Furthermore, because Sands's project explored how learning stories affect the learning community's understanding of children's learners' identities, it serves as an important piece of research for illustrating how quality documented assessment works to strengthen learner identities over time. And I've said repeatedly, as have others, time and time again, this is a principal imperative of teachers' work. Researching through a narrative inquiry lens and producing data through questionnaires, videos, and structured reflections around selected learning stories, Sands worked with children, with Kaiako, and with parents to understand how their senses of children as learners were shaped by their engagement with learning stories that were focused on dispositions. As an example of the kinds of data produced in the study, I'm going to share a few bits of data from a paper that Lorraine and her research supervisor, Katrina McChesney, published in the New Zealand Journal of Education Studies in December. Reflecting on a series of narratives about Brielle herself, her parents, and her Kaiako talked about Brielle as a learner. They said these kinds of things. Brielle said, now she's 7, she said, I think I'm a good learner and I always try my hardest. The parents' perspective, we knew that she was a determined learner at home, and this definitely showed through as a common theme. And Brielle's teacher, the words that stick out to me, they reflected. When Brielle sets herself a goal, there's no stopping her. She works with grit and determination. Just notice here how everybody is recognizing the same thing, even years later. And then reflecting on how learning disposition focused narratives tuned people's attention to learning in a consistent way. Kate, Tessa's mum, said, Tessa is still proud to tell us that she was brave, especially as she was nervous to begin with. This is a great example we use with Tessa to remind her that sometimes new things make us feel scared and unsure. And Sharon, mother to Reese, said, the learning stories gave us words to describe Reese, an explorer, a friend, a reader. And I found I noticed similar things at home, and felt empowered. Now, Sand's conclusions included observations on how the documented assessment or narratives as learning stories that were learning disposition focus, how they accentuated children's sense of themselves as confident and competent learners who built on what they knew. Children's mana was nurtured. They were confidently moving between worlds as those around them increased their shared understandings of those children's learning dispositions, their power. And so returning to the question of why does any of this matter? Well, the assessment information is accounting for children as capable and confident learners and communicators. People who are important enough in this social setting for their teacher and for others to take them and their ideas seriously, to write to them so that others can understand their learning power too. And so that these children, in later conversations with Kaiako peers themselves and family members about these learning experiences, can be reminded of this. And here's the real power, I think, the thing that makes practices of assessment about empowerment. Jerome Bruner, he's a scholar whose ideas influenced me a lot. In 1991, he wrote about story, saying, "We live our lives through story. We organize our experience and our memory of human happenings mainly in the form of narrative, stories, excuses, myths, reasons for doing and not doing, and so on. And so for the child to be able to read with others about themselves as a learner who shapes the world and accomplishes much with others time after time, well, the child might start to believe it. And from those beliefs, fueled by the stories we've been telling, draw strength for the forthcoming challenges they're undoubtedly going to face as a learner in the world. And so I want to end here and invite you to think about the teacher's use of voice, or the power that you hold in the pen, and how through narrative assessment practices in early childhood, you can shape the stories that we hear and tell of the powerful child as learner in early childhood education. And I invite you to think carefully about what you're currently doing and not doing in this regard, and to consider how best you might restore or restore your work in the ways that I've hopefully described. Nō reira e hōmā. I just have a last slide there with the papers and things that I've talked about this afternoon. So I will leave it there. I'll stop the share and we can kōrero for a bit. Kei te pai. Kia ora, Helen.
Kia ora, Alex. You've given us a lot to think about. And just while we get some questions through from some of our participants, I would just like to refer back to the beginning aspect that you talked about, making assessment an integral aspect of our daily work rather than a post-hoc burden. So I imagine that there are many teachers who are here today who are thinking about how did we create this burden and how might we dial the expectations back? So I wondered if you'd like to respond to that first, please.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk about undocumented assessment or formative or teaching as formative assessment is because I really do want teachers to rebalance and understand that formative assessment, those decisions that they're making, the conversations they're having with children, the nod, the smile, the encouragement, the provocation, they are examples of assessment work. It's teachers taking in information, sizing it up, making a judgment, suggesting something that fundamentally changes the teaching and learning program to help the child achieve the goal that they're pursuing right then and there. You can't get any more local curriculum than that, nor can you get any better use of assessment information than that, right? So the thing is, you can't write about everything. And we write in retrospect. And so we have to take our time in our teaching to recognize the important threads of learning that we want to reify through the documented assessment. And so that does take time, and teachers need a framework around that work in each of their services that reflects what matters there for them and their children, any particular interests or strengths or place-related kaupapa that might be significant, or values, or dispositions in addition to those learning dispositions that are associated with Te Whāriki. You know, we have to make a decision about the things that we want to write about and we want to track and reify in the documented assessment. Because until we do that, we can't give a shape to the things that matter in this local community with these people and, you know, at this time. So part of it is, I think, having that conversation, deciding what you're going to write about. I think working theories and learning dispositions are a good start, but then that's a window into the discussion about what is the particular flavour of curriculum or value or whatever it is that you want to emphasise at a particular time. So that conversation has to happen, and then you can let a whole lot of other stuff go. So then it doesn't become about this number of documented assessments in this time frame around this range of things, because you've got the range of things that is organically situated, I think. We have to start with that conversation about, I mean, we say it all the time, what matters here? I mean, it sounds trite, but actually, what do your parents want to know about? What do your kids want to know about?
Yeah, a very deep question when you start to consider it. Yeah, thank you. You posed a really interesting point in saying, what do you want a child to learn by reading their portfolio? And you reminded me of an instance in a project I was involved in where a child who was almost almost 5, heading off to school, had been in the centre a long time, had 3 huge portfolios, and I asked her to take me through it, and she very quickly, right from the start, would flip through and then show me something, and then flip through and show me the next item, and narrated, you know, her own story of her learning over that time. And that was a very strong indication to me of how much of this documentation that teachers had done may have really been peripheral to what really mattered to her and her learning identity. But I guess it's hard at the beginning when teachers are getting to know a child to know which aspects are the strongest in that learner identity. So what would you recommend, because you did talk about Lorraine Sand's research and talking to the child and the parents as well as the teacher, are there some practices that would help to try to kind of nail in, not necessarily as early as possible, because you don't want to shut the possibilities off. Just as part of this, how do we kind of refocus and reframe?
Well, part of the thing is always talking with the child about what you're documenting first up, because over time, when you're in conversation with a child regularly about the things you might want to document about and what they might mean, and oftentimes that will change for the child, and oftentimes it will change for you too, because you might have documented this here, and then 6 months later this happened, and then you might think, oh crikey, that relates to this, and so your meaning is continually shifting as well. So I think the first strategy is keep the children in the conversation. And oftentimes that doesn't happen because we are working with this hierarchy of objectives and thinking, oh, well, I've got this rule in my workplace that says I've got to do this and this. And so I think we have to slow those things down and bring the children back to the forefront of this to know how they're interpreting, what sense they're making of themselves over time. And then you can document more about that or not. Look at, take a different tack.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And Alison Warren has put up a question that's on one of my favourite topics about what I call the early childhood paparazzi. She's one of many who is thanking you for a very inspiring presentation. And she asks, can you please kōrero about the place of photos in learning stories? They're powerful as a means for recall and to encourage tamariki to think about what was happening for them. But sometimes it seems that Kaiako feel that a learning story is impossible without a photo. What do you think?
Yeah. I have a love-hate relationship with photographs. And that's partly because we're just creating data and all that data has to be stored somewhere. And so there's a sensibility around me about all the stuff that we're uploading to heaven knows where and all the electricity we're using around the world to keep it there. It's never going to get used. But so that's a problem. But also in some of the research that I've done with Joss Nuttall and Tonya Rooney and Jane White recently, we have thought about the image and the work that the image does. And there's a paper that one of the chapters in Weaving Te Whāriki, the 3rd edition, where a teacher and I looked really hard at how the images, the interplay between the text that was being written and the placement and selection of images into a learning story, and how we got this veneer of an holistic or cohesive narrative. But what you see there is also what you don't see. So, the photos, there's a good argument to be made about the photographs landing us back in a place so that we can have a new conversation about it. There's a good argument for having the photographs there to help children reconnect with and make new sense of the experiences that are being documented about. There's an excellent argument to be made there for photographs to be there to help people, parents, family, have a window into an aspect of their child's life that they weren't actually there for themselves. So you can tell a lot about from the photo, including the things and the people that came together in that constellation to make that valued learning happen. So, if you've got photos over a long period of time with the same people in them, that's a clue to this child's learning power, the people that they draw strength from. So I think we have to raise our consciousness about what we want the photos to do and use them deliberately. I am not in favour of this idea of a photo. Was it a photo speaks 1,000 words? Sure, it does. But as a teacher whose expertise is learning and who is supposed to be providing a window into their judgment making about teaching and the decisions they're making, you cannot leave that photo unremarked. Now, it doesn't mean that your commentary on the photo is the absolute truth, but it does show the 3rd, 4th, and 5th audience member down the track, manager, so-and-so and so-and-so else who are looking at this writing for whatever purpose. It does show them or give them an insight into your decision making, and that's an important aspect of your assessment work. You're a teacher after all. And this is a systematic part of the process. So I'm not a fan of just having a photo there with nothing said about it. Not at all.
we're reminded of your previous seminar on the digital gaze and many of your thoughts around that. I'm also aware that many of those who are here today use digital platforms such as Storypark and Educa. I guess some people might think those are ways to make documentation less of a post-hoc burden, but I just wondered if you'd like to take the opportunity to comment on your thoughts about the benefits and drawbacks of those kind of platforms.
So, those platforms started out with a really specific goal in mind, which was to increase family centre communication about things that are happening for children. That's a laudable aim, and these platforms undeniably do that. The question is, to what extent do the platforms, because they support teachers' assessment work, so and the assessment part of that is for me, is the interpretation part around what does this description of this event with these photographs, what does it mean? And so I have questions about, well, I used to call it, when Te Whāriki was first out, because we all did it, I used to call it cut and paste curriculum, whereby these platforms have a phrase or a sentence or a whakatauki or the strand or a learning outcome or something from Te Whāriki just there to click and drag in. Yeah. Now, some centres actually do work in the platforms and make their own criteria around these things. That's really deep assessment work, but they do afford the happy clicker to just be able to come along and just go click, 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 click. Suddenly it looks like everybody's supposed to know what it is that you're thinking when you click this strand, this learning outcome, this whakatauki. But these things have to be interpreted. And so without that deliberate interpretive process, that analysis and interpretation being made explicit in the documentation, that's where the teacher bit falls over. And it just becomes a story with a picture and a couple of links. And so we also get criticised for being too teacherly about this stuff. There is a balance. But Te Whāriki does tell us that teachers have to put the work in to interpret the curriculum framework with families. So there's a message there about balancing that out too. It's sometimes they can be very, very useful, and sometimes they can just reify some of the problems or the criticisms of teachers' work, I think. Also, again, just back to the data stuff, Helen, there are millions and trillions and billions of data points about children that have been generated through these tools that are sitting somewhere in the world. And there are serious questions that we have to start asking about data sovereignty and what's going to happen in 20, 30 years to all this data. And yeah, so, gosh, and I don't even know how to start thinking about that.
Yeah. I don't understand clouds and exactly how these clouds are really going to work, as you say, in the future. Well, kia ora e ho, ka rawe to a kōrero. You've invited us to get a grip, so we'll try and get a grip and revisit the power of powerful assessment and restoring for children's mana and capabilities and identity. And I know that you leave everyone here with much to continue talking about with their peers and colleagues. And we've already had requests for, when will this be available so that we can watch it again and look at the slides and listen to you and think about our practices. So again, Alex, I really want to thank you for the energy and advocacy you offer to early childhood in Aotearoa, and thank you for again agreeing to be part of our seminar series. And I'll hand back to Justine to close the webinar.
Kia ora, Helen, and thank you, Alex, for your presentation this evening. It's such a treat to have two of our early childhood professors in the same space. Alex Thank you for reminding us this evening that assessment practice is an integral part of the daily work of early childhood kaiako, and restoring the vision of assessment as meaningful to teaching and learning, not just an additional job to be done in non-contact time or in our own time to meet external accountability expectations. You've given us plenty to reflect on in relation to our practice, and we hope that this presentation sparks conversations and a revisioning of assessment practices in early childhood settings. So ngā mihi nui ki a koe, Alex. Thank you.
And I agree.
To our early childhood seminar series audience, if you wish to share or revisit this presentation, and I know people are already asking, can they get copies of the slides? And I'm directing you now to going and watching the recording of this. And you can find that on our early childhood seminar series YouTube channel. Will be up in a couple of days. We do look forward to seeing you all back for our next seminar in early May. So keep an eye on your inbox for the flyer and registration information. Thank you again for joining us this evening. We'll close with a whakatauki. Manaaki whenua, manaaki tangata, haere whakamua. Care for the land, care for the people, go forward. Take good care, everyone. Kia kaha, kia ora, kia atawhai, ka kite anō.